Congress, our conservative Republican Congress, has done more damage to the Constitution than the executive branch over the last 8 years. And the fact of the matter is, if they were constitutional, they would be defunding all of these executive agency actions that do not comply with the Constitution.
Nearly 10 million ounces of gold resources through acquisition. This 50-cent stock has received a $2.65 price target from Cantor Fitzgerald. It's the one must-own precious metal stock according to New York Times bestselling author and fund manager Marin Katusa. Learn more at CrushTheStreet.com/gold2016.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I am Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined today with KrisAnne Hall, who is an attorney and former prosecutor who travels the country now teaching the Constitution and the history that gave us our founding documents. So she's a first-time guest, and I think she's going to connect some dots for us today. She's the host of the KrisAnne Hall Show. And from what I can tell, just getting to know her, she's extremely passionate and very smart. So, KrisAnne, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show with me today.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
You know, I love talking philosophy, you know, the Constitution, liberty, and obviously you've gone down a lot of rabbit holes and explored these topics. So I'm going to enjoy being able to pick your brain today in this short interview here. But I want the audience to get to know you by going down the rabbit hole of talking about the Constitution and liberty. So let's start off here. How far has America come from the Constitution, from what it was meant to be?
Oh, my goodness. That could take up the entire interview.
Just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, well, for example, I think a good example is the presidential election and the attention that we give the presidential election. We talk about the president, we call him the leader of America. The president was never intended to be the leader of America. The president, by Constitution, is at best the leader of the military, but only when Congress has a formal declaration of war. When there is no formal declaration of war, Congress has control of the military. The other job that the executive branch holds is creating treaties. But the president can't unilaterally make agreements with foreign nations. He can't make treaties. He has to have the approval of 2/3 of the Senate. And so without 2/3 of the Senate, the president can't even appoint people. So he can't make treaties. He has the authority to make nominations. He can nominate justices for federal courts, for the Supreme Court. He nominates cabinet members. But by Constitution, he doesn't automatically get who he chooses. It is only, those appointments are only complete when the 2/3 of the Senate approves the appointments. And so we have this sort of misconception that the president has this enormous power, when in reality, he has very little compared to Congress. We were not created with 3 co-equal branches of government. We were created with a hierarchy of federal government, where Congress was vested with the most power, and the House has more power than the Senate because the House controls the budget. The president then has the next amount of power, and then the judiciary has the least, which is another flip-flop that we have when we now consider the fact that we have this sort of judicial supremacy idea where we talk about Supreme Court rulings and how the Supreme Court made law. The Supreme Court doesn't issue rulings. Courts don't issue rulings. Kings issue rulings. Courts issue opinions. And if those opinions do not comply with the Constitution first, then those opinions are no more binding on you than your next-door neighbor's opinions. The Supreme Court cannot create law because that is a per se violation of separation of powers, which is an automatic violation of the Constitution itself. The power to make laws has been reserved to the legislative branch alone. And so just looking at those few simple basic understandings of government in the through the Constitution, I think we can get an idea of just how far we've come.
KrisAnne, so the Constitution is supposed to be self-regulating in the way it was written and protected. But what has happened over the years that has eroded away our society from a constitutional grounded society?
Well, I would say there are a lot of small factors, but Samuel Adams called out the major culprit. He said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, "But on the contrary, when a people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." And we can point our finger at the president, which is hardly the case, because if Congress really hated everything that the president was doing today, they could defund it tomorrow without any type of constitutional obstruction. Because the majority in the House alone controls the budget under Article 1, Section 7. The Senate has some input, but they don't have any kind of filibuster or veto power by Constitution. And the President of the United States has absolutely no say at all in the budget pursuant to the Constitution. And so what the real problem is because we the people have become so ignorant as to the proper functioning of government and the limitation of the federal government. And this is also key, the means by which we best control the federal government. This is why we're in the situation that we're in.
Well, when it comes to the only choices that we essentially have for, the government, the president, Republicans and Democrats, Republicans are the ones who proclaim themselves as people who follow the Constitution. So would you agree that Republicans are followers of the Constitution?
Absolutely not. Maybe according to their platform, but not according to their actions. Our Congress, our conservative Republican Congress, has done more damage to the Constitution than the executive branch over the last 8 years. And the fact of the matter is, if they were constitutional, they would be defunding all of these executive agency actions that do not comply with the Constitution. And, it's been that way. It's not the current problem. It's been that way for a long time. Take, for example, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was primarily a Republican thing. The federal government was never delegated any authority to have any kind of ruling power over marriage. At best, that is a power that is reserved to the states. But when the Republicans federalized marriage through the Defense of Marriage Act, they made people in America believe that marriage was a federal issue, and now we have the Supreme Court bringing it up as a matter of opinion, and everybody running around as if the federal government can create laws about marriage. That's simply, completely, and totally unconstitutional.
Well, and we know that when they're trying to pass budgets, the Democrats have their agenda, the Republicans have their agenda, and everything's passed at the last minute, and it all just kind of gets pushed through, and both sides kind of get a little bit of a compromise. But the compromise, again, like you're saying, is so far away from small government and what the Constitution has demanded and confined what should be our laws, and it's progressively eroding. Would you agree that it is continuing to erode, or is there hope for change?
Well, I believe that it is continuing to erode, but there is hope for change because people are beginning to wake up and realize this colossal federal government and the fact that it has become, like that science fiction film, The Blob, right? So what's happened now is the more that the government consumes, the larger it becomes, and then the more it consumes. And so people are beginning to see that, and they're beginning to push back, and they're beginning to look for the real solutions. And in my travels and my teachings, I teach about 265 lessons in over 22 states every single year. So I see a lot of people. I taught over 40,000 people just last year between November and October. And so I'm seeing people asking new questions, asking the right questions, and coming to the realization that we're not going to fix Washington, D.C. at Washington, D.C. And to be honest, that's not even the solution that our framers had in mind when they created our constitutional republic. They knew that the federal government would never govern and restrain itself, which is why we're not a kingdom and we're a constitutional republic, because the real solution to getting the federal government out of control occurs at the state and local level. When the governors understand that they don't have to comply with laws and regulations that are made outside the Constitution, regardless of what the Supreme Court says about it, we start restoring the balance of power in our constitutional republic. We're seeing states stand up to the federal government. Kansas, for example, passed a state law that said no federal gun laws will be enforced in the state of Kansas, and any agent attempting to enforce federal gun laws will be arrested and prosecuted to the highest extent of state law. We have states that are refusing to comply with federal marijuana laws because the federal government has no delegated authority to regulate or create laws about plants. We have states that are nullifying the Defense of Marriage Act, saying we won't comply because the federal government has no authority over marriage. And so these are the things that we're seeing happening, and it's beginning to happen. I'm feeling a bit of a snowballing going on here with the states awakening to their duty to protect the power that's been reserved to them.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, when the Constitution was written, I mean, how many people were here in the United States? I think it was in the
4 million.
4 million. So now we have a president that presides over 300 million in a federal government. So that's the whole point. And they understood the power needed to be with the states at that time. And,
right.
It's even more important now that, the country is so much larger. So, I mean, great points. And that is exciting. That is exciting that you're seeing that and that we're seeing that power beginning and hopefully shifting towards the states. So, KrisAnne, I do want to shift over and talk about the government's role in taxes. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this man. His name's Irwin Schiff. He's Peter Schiff's father. And he was an American tax protester who died in prison because he said the income tax is unconstitutional and refused to pay his taxes. So you can't argue with this guy's passion, and I do feel that the income tax is the definition of redistribution of wealth. But I don't know if I would, die in prison not paying my taxes just to make a point. But as a constitutional expert, is the income tax lawful?
Well, let's go back and look at the intent of taxation on the national level. The intent of taxation on the national level was to pay off the national debt, not to increase spending. And the mechanism by which the taxes were to be collected on purpose, by design, was through the states based on a census so that the states were apportioned their proper portion of the national debt based on their population. And that way, because the states retained the majority of the power and the federal government was delegated a small portion, if the states were then paying the national debt, they were also the gatekeepers to the purse. And all of our framers believed that the power of the purse was the most effective tool to control government. Madison said it, Jefferson said it, Washington said it. And they placed that power of taxation, of collection of taxation, through the states so that the states would be able to say, okay, we will pay that because that is specifically a power that we have delegated to you, and you need to have this funding to exercise this power. But we are not going to pay you for this, that, and the other because these are our powers, and we're not going to pay you to exercise our powers. We're not going to pay for that. And so it gave them the ultimate control over the budget. The federal government was never supposed to have direct access to the people. Because the federal government doesn't represent the people. The federal government represents the states. The Constitution is not an agreement between the people and the federal government. And the reason we know that is because the Constitution was not ratified by popular votes. The Constitution was ratified by 3/4 of the states. The Constitution is an agreement between the states that created the federal government. And knowing that the federal government represents the states and not the people, it's the states that are supposed to be controlling and paying for the operations of their creation. But when the federal government has direct access to the people by law or by funding, then all of a sudden you have bypassed the most essential check and balance to the control of the federal government. And in doing so, you have transmuted America from a constitutional republic to, at best, a mixed monarchy, an oligarchy, if you will.
Wow.
Because now they have control over the people, and the people look to the government with no redress.
How does the federal government justify its actions then, with, completely disregarding the Constitution?
Well, because, again, it's the matter of ignorance. They don't really have to justify it legally through the Constitution. We have devolved into a society that accepts the federal government saying, I say, so you will. We have slipped into a society of judicial supremacy so that we believe that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of everything constitutional. And nothing could have been further from the intention of our framers. They never intended for the states and the people to be bound by the federal government's ultimate whim and rule. You see, I think we forget sometimes that the judiciary is part of the federal government. We like to believe that it's a independent tribunal, but it simply doesn't work that way. It is part of the federal government. Its power has been delegated through the Constitution. It has no more power than has been delegated to it. And Article 6, Section 2 says that if it's doing something outside the Constitution, its actions are invalid. But we have come to this realization through this sort of circular logic, right? The Supreme Court created an opinion that said that they had the power to determine the Constitution. And so since they said they have the power, they now have the power. And they say, we have this power. And so we don't teach the fact that it's actually the states that rule over the Supreme Court in matters of constitution.
KrisAnne, when it comes to the 2016 election, it does seem like people are turning towards candidates that are anti-establishment. Now, Hillary is leading for the Democrats, but Bernie Sanders did get a lot of attention being that outside of the establishment candidate. And then we also have Donald Trump, who is completely shaking up the Republican Party, and he is an outside of the establishment party who is actually leading in the polls at the moment. So, I'd like to get your thoughts on, the 2016 presidential campaign race. Let's start off with Trump. Does Trump have any qualities that represent what the Constitution is demanded from the presidential spot?
Well, let me sort of, if I can, redirect that just a moment.
No problem.
This election in November, do we realize that there are 469 seats in Congress up for election in November as well? Mm-hmm. And that there are probably over 30,000 seats in state and local government up for election in November?
That's what people should be focused on.
Right. Why are we so consumed by one office and two people? And if we're operating constitutionally, this office of the president has so very little power over the states and the people of the United States. And so we can take all of the candidates as a whole and say there is not a single candidate up there that is truly constitutionally minded. Because if we had a presidential candidate that was constitutionally minded, the platform would be considered radical by the media today and by politicians today. Because a presidential candidate who was constitutional would say, I am going to work over my first 4 years are going to be spent dissolving, disarming, and disbanding every unconstitutional executive agency. We will get rid of the EPA. We will get rid of the FDA. We will get rid of the Department of Education. We will get rid of the Bureau of Land Management. We will get rid of the Department of Interior, the Department of Energy, and all of these agencies that exercise powers that are reserved to the states. That presidential candidate would say, then over these 4 years, I will also withdraw every single member of our armed forces overseas until there is a formal declaration of war issued by Congress. And so these are the types of things. I will restore civil liberties to the people. There will be no seizing of any property or any effects of the people of the United States without a proper warrant. And I will disband all secret U.S. courts. I mean, we need to realize that our FBI operates not under courts that are established by the Constitution or even courts that are established by us. They have secret courts that issue their pretended warrants to come after all the people. And so we need to realize that our solutions are the states, their governors, the local sheriffs who are going to stand up and say, I don't care who's president of the United States. I don't care what their party is. I will defend the Constitution and the liberties of the people, and I will not allow the federal government to exercise unlawful power in my jurisdiction.
That's powerful, KrisAnne. At what point do Americans violently resist the federal government? Would it be them, the federal government, coming to confiscate firearms, a direct tax or control on our bank accounts, an issue of RFID chips, from what some are considering to be even the mark of the beast? What would it take for Americans to violently resist the federal government?
Well, here's the catch. We don't have to, because we're not a kingdom. That was the whole purpose for creating a constitutional republic, so that the posterity of our framers would not have to engage in violent revolution. Our remedies are peaceful because we have control over our state and local governments. Do you know how easy it is to resist unlawful federal authority? It is so easy. All you need is a sheriff. Just one sheriff in your county who will stand up to the federal government and say, my deputies will not assist you, and you will not execute your power in my county. And if you try to execute your power, your stolen power in my county, I will arrest you.
Wow, you don't hear that very often.
Well, but the problem is it is happening more often now.
Yeah.
But even though you don't hear it, because the media is now a puppet for the government machine, and they don't want you to know just how often this is happening.
Wow.
Because when it happens, there is no violence. When it happens, it is resolved peacefully and quietly, so you never have to hear about it. Can you imagine if the media covered what happened in Idaho to a veteran who had the VA administration threatening to come to confiscate all of his guns? If the media covered that like they did Burns, Oregon.
Right.
I mean, the sheriff stood there on the front porch and told the VA, you will not come and get this man's guns without a proper warrant, and there'll be no arrests without my permission.
Wow.
And that was it. It was done. We have it happening with sheriffs who are telling the Bureau of Land Management and the EPA, you will not possess the land of my people, and if you try to, I will arrest you. And it happens and ends quietly.
It really goes to show how the power is supposed to be at the lower level, and the lower level has more power than the highest level, than what we conventionally think. So I wanted to ask you this question, and just to see, maybe because you are a constitutionalist, I might already have my answer, but is there anything about the Constitution that you disagree with?
Well, as it stands, I wouldn't say disagree. I would love to see the 16th and 17th Amendments repealed, but they're not part of the original Constitution. if I had, because I'm a hindsight 2020 armchair quarterback, right? If I had my way about it, there would be a provision within the Constitution that defines the clauses, the general welfare clause, the necessary proper clause, the tax and spending clause. All of those clauses would be defined in language in the manner in which Madison defined them during the debates and during his arguments in 1792.
So even with those revisions, though, it is pretty impressive how timeless this document really is. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It is timeless, and it's because it was not created by our framers. There's nothing new or nothing novel in our Constitution or our Declaration or in our Bill of Rights. As a matter of fact, everything in those three documents comes from the British Constitution that had evolved for over 600 years by the time our framers wrote the Constitution. And so there are 5 documents that created our Declaration, our Constitution, and our Bill of Rights: the 1100 Charter of Liberties, the Magna Carta of 1215, the Petition of Right of 1628, the Grand Remonstrance of 1641, and the English Bill of Rights of 1689. Each of these documents creating a more and more limited government, securing more and more liberty for the people, was the history and the lessons learned that our framers brought to the table when they were creating our Constitution. Alexander Hamilton even mentioned in Federalist Papers 45 that these were the documents that created and were incorporated through their creation into our Constitution.
Wow. KrisAnne Hall, everyone. KrisAnne, if people want to reach out to you, get to know you more, or find out where they can, access your content, where would they go and what would they find?
Well, they can go to my website, KrisAnneHall.com. It's spelled KrisAnnehall.com. I have I have almost 150 articles now. I have a radio show that broadcasts 6 days a week. You can catch the archives on my website. I have a television show that broadcasts twice a week on the Christian Television Network, Monday and Thursday, and you can find out how to watch that on my website. I have newsletters that I put out once a week. I have you can get in contact with my Facebook page where I'm posting every day. What I do is I take things that you see in the headlines and teach constitutional lessons from them. For example, my radio show today is about the secret actions of our federal government. So the FBI is secretly changing their mechanisms of surveillance on the people through secret courts. And our House of Representatives is trying to expand federal power over our local law enforcement without us knowing about it. And so we talk about those things, and those are the things that we'll be talking about on Facebook and Twitter as well. I also have a YouTube channel. And so there are lots of videos both on my YouTube and my YouTube channel that people can access. And I have written 5 books too.
Oh. KrisAnne Hall, everyone. KrisAnne, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this important news, and just thank you in general for the work that you're doing and educating the population on these very important things, because there's not many people doing what you do, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, I feel very privileged to have this opportunity to do this and to have the ability to do it. It is my example of life, fortune, and sacred honor. It's my gift back to those who gave everything to us. And it's not just me, though. This is a family mission, because we are on the road so much. My husband and my son are totally supportive of me. They travel around the country with me. My husband is a missionary to Haiti, and so when we're not in the United States, we're on mission trips to Haiti as a family. And we are just very blessed to be able to stand up for God's gifts of liberty.
Yeah. You're constantly serving, and it's very honorable. God bless you, KrisAnne, and we'd love to have you on again in the near future.
Oh, anytime. You're a great host.